All right, well, thanks for meeting with me. I just wanted to sync up on a couple of things this morning and make sure we're on the same page with our plans for production vulnerability scanning.
Sure.
We're still figuring out the final state of the front end. And so I just wanted to make sure, first of all, that I understand the relationship between those policies and environments and clusters, because all of those things are a little bit confusing. And then I wanted to talk about the actual YAML syntax that goes in the security policy.
Sure.
So again, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things there, if that's all right.
Okay.
So the way we've got it in the mock right now, let me pull it up. Is that when you set up one of these policies, right now you can only do it as a schedule policy, but I guess I'm not sure if you can do it as a pipeline as well. But then you actually go and you pick an environment to be scanned on a regular basis. And I'm not sure if that's how it actually works or if that needs to change.
So maybe I'll quickly go what we currently have with the MVC or actually what we have right now. So let me just quickly share my screen. Okay, so first of all, let me start with the epic and with the plan that we had here. So what we want to achieve is to be able to get vulnerabilities from the cluster, from Kubernetes cluster. We are trying to not think about policies, but provide a way to do it like using GitLab right now, what we can do. So the plan is that there's already a project, cluster image scanning, that has, it is an analyzer, but it's really like early alpha version. It's basically one bash script and one Ruby script that converts from the like format that is provided by Starboard to a format that we have at GitLab. So what it does, it is connecting to Kubernetes, getting vulnerabilities, all of them as JSON file with given kubeconfig, and just convert them like to a JSON file. And then we are using Ruby to convert it. So it's that simple. So how it's currently configured, if I'll go to live to my test application, I have a YAML file that is actually using this this cluster image scanning project. It is working the same as we have for any other analyzer. So it connects to the analyzer. Analyzer connects to Kubernetes cluster, gets the results, and those results are available. So for now, what you need to do is to specify the kubeconfig. There is already an MR with proposals for the documentation part. So maybe that will for those that are looking for the recording. At the recording, we have here. We have the template and we have the documentation part, so it might be easier to understand how it works internally. So I've written here how to configure the cluster, how to configure the kubeconfig, how to obtain all the tokens that you need, and so on, and then how to configure it in the GitLab itself. So I have this YAML file. This YAML file is running. And in the settings, what I have for settings for CI/CD, I have configured the variable that contains the configuration to the cluster to connect to it. So back to the prototype we have. Could you send me the link? I'll just open it here.
Sure. Let me see if I can find it. See if this works. Sorry, I have the link to it locally, but it's going to take just a minute to find the other one. Here it is.
No worries.
Oh, that one's not loading. Looks like it might be down at the moment.
Okay. No worries. So, okay, what we had there is actually ability to schedule a scan on given time, and you're selecting the environment. So that's the important part. How to do it with what we currently have. So we have variables. So whenever we will set up the environment in the policy, we'll set a proper environment variable that will be sent to analyzer. Analyzer will decide, okay, I'll filter out those vulnerability reports because these are not related to the namespace I want to scan. So currently what we have in the policy design will actually work with what we currently have in the MVC.
So I'm wondering, how do those environments map to clusters? Do you have to also select the cluster? Should that be a drop-down as well? Or does, I don't understand the relationship in GitLab between environments and Kubernetes clusters. Is it, you know, a one-to-many, or what kind of relationship exists there?
I don't remember, to be honest, about that. But whenever you have an environment, I'm talking about the backend code, I know. So whenever you have an environment and you have a cluster configured for a given project, there is a specific pattern that is used to generate the name of that environment that will be used in Kubernetes. So having the environment, we can map it to a cluster namespace. So this is how it works. I don't have like, I need to take a look at the documentation to see how it works like properly. But this is how I was doing that. I was looking at the cluster, and I was looking at the environment. I was looking at the cluster connected to the project, and then I was able to generate the namespace, the name of the namespace that is used to deploy apps, and also to filter those vulnerabilities.
So I guess what I'm asking, like here, even in that MR that you've got open there on line 132, right? You said you provide the credentials in that kubeconfig variable. So that seems a little bit redundant because users are already providing credentials to connect clusters to GitLab in the infrastructure Kubernetes tab, right? So they either connect it through a cluster certificate or they connect through the agent. And so I'm wondering, can we just use those credentials that they've already provided just by them the environment? Can we figure out which Kubernetes cluster that maps to and use those credentials?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and of course it's possible. I just need to do small tweak in the code to send those variables, because right now we are sending the kubeconfig variable only when we are deploying. So it only for protected branch when we run a pipeline, when there's a deploy, then we are specifying this kubeconfig variable. It's not available widely because it is a risk to have that, because other job, I don't know, malicious job, or you could create an MR that could somehow get your kubeconfig from your GitLab. So as for now, whenever you're doing deploy, this variable is available for the job that is performing the deploy, but it's not like widely available. And the other thing is that when you configure the containers scanning, they have like Kubernetes cluster here now. So whenever you're configuring it, I need to, okay. So whenever you're configuring it, you have the cluster name, URL, the certificate, and the token. And these are for cluster admin role. We don't want to give that permissions to analyzer that should only be able to fetch those vulnerabilities from the cluster. So for me, it's a security risk that we could give too much to the analyzer itself. I want to be able only to get, here's the role. I will want only to get, watch, and list vulnerability reports that are available on the cluster. That's why we have separate role. That's why we have separate service account. So the UX improvement on that would be to, whenever we are configuring the, I'll just switch to new project, so I'll not expose my credentials to my cluster. So whenever we're configuring it, we could also add, instead of like additional service token, like service token without the cluster admin privileges, but with only those small chunk of permissions that we need to get vulnerabilities. So that's the main problem. Like the service token that we are currently using for Kubernetes integration wants too much, and we don't want to be responsible for leaking it or anything like that. We want to be able to only ask for things that are needed. So that is why I have prepared like separate path for that. That's why it's not really yet GitLab native, but it's still an MVC. It's something that we'll build, but I want to make sure that the base, that what we have in the base, it's secure.
Okay, so if we go back to that Kubernetes cluster, if we wanted to add a tab to this view up top for security, no, I guess actually after you have a cluster connected, but you come in there, there's the details tab, there's like a metrics tab, there are a few tabs there. If we wanted to add a security tab and list all of the vulnerabilities for that specific cluster, would we be able to do that with this implementation? Can we map basically the environments over to the clusters that they have connected in GitLab? Got it.
I must think about that. Yeah, I heard the discussion that you had, that we should. Okay, I'll go back to my where I have configured the.
And I'm wondering if environment is the right thing to use. Like instead, should we be letting users pick a Kubernetes cluster that they have connected and then select which namespaces inside of that cluster they want to scan? Is that a better solution than using environments?
Definitely. When you're there will be no magic for users. They will know from which namespaces they want to get vulnerabilities from. Right. Otherwise, there will be some magic, and maybe some are not using environments. Maybe they just want to connect the cluster just to get those vulnerabilities, but without like the whole integration with Kubernetes cluster. So definitely, what we have in the design is doable. If you want to do it better, that's a great suggestion. Just go with Kubernetes namespaces. That will simplify a lot.
Okay, so we should probably change that then, so that you're picking a cluster and then you pick namespaces in there. And they should be able to pick clusters that are connected in this method, the certificate method, or clusters that are connected through a GitLab agent, right?
They should be able to do it, yeah.
Okay, so that way the workflow would be you connect your cluster to GitLab first, and then you're able to select that from the dropdown. And yeah, I mean, I agree, it's good to not end up using more permissions than we need. The challenge is that users are already giving us cluster admin permissions if they connect a cluster through the certificate method. So even though this piece requires lesser permissions, like it's kind of too late. They've already given GitLab cluster admin rights. So it feels a little bit redundant to me to have them provide 2 tokens when GitLab already has stewardship of a cluster admin token anyway. It seems like we may as well just use that one, so they don't have to provide 2. I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding something about the security risk there, but it feels like it's already that they're giving GitLab cluster admin rights, and so we may as well just use that token they've already given us. Yeah.
So yeah, it's all about exposure, like to limit the exposure. Who knows what could happen? But let's say we have it configured on GitLab.com, and you are not a part of the company, but you're like community contributor, and you're modifying the GitLab CI YAML file into creating an MR, and with that kubeconfig exposed, you could do something malicious with that kubeconfig variable. I don't know, maybe just show it in the logs or something like that. So it's all about, even though the variable could leak, like we don't want to leak like the whole cluster admin role. We want to do it like with small portion. Okay, maybe it makes no sense.
Is there a way to move that out of instead of having it be an environment variable? Can we just store that I don't know where we store the token today for our Kubernetes connection, but can we just read it from there? So it's not an environment variable. It's not something that anyone can just, read with if they create an MR, but that way, it's a little bit more secure and it's only accessible with the, live container scanning job, or
Yeah.
whatever we called it, cluster image scanning.
So what I believe it's here as the iteration tree. So use the Kubernetes agent to fetch results. This is like the last step that we want to have, because this is how we will do it. With those first two iterations that we want to just like step by step build the feature and then extend it to use like Kubernetes agent. It's just to provide a way for users to get vulnerabilities from their cluster into GitLab. The last one is the most secure way. It will not use the like pipeline, because the main problem is the pipeline, because the way we communicate from GitLab with Runner is through those variables. So
Right.
at some point they have to be exposed, because jobs are simply like Docker images containing different applications that they can only communicate by getting those data from environment variables. So that's why there is Kubernetes agent, because there is that risk of exposing the token to your Kubernetes agent, to your Kubernetes cluster. So the first iteration that is planned for next, or the, I don't know to which milestone, is the solution that we want to use eventually. So for now, I'm working on the first iteration, so we have something, we can get some feedback and so on.
Okay, so to clarify, when we get to iteration 3, we will deprecate that kubeconfig and stop using that kubeconfig variable, and instead we can just read the token directly from GitLab at that point. Well,
Yeah,
it'll be through the
yeah. That's something that definitely we can do. It will be just a separate option. In my opinion, it's good to have two options. So someone will use Kubernetes agent, but some would like just to use the variable. But it's up to customers what they want to do with that. If they want to configure like the whole PaaS and Kubernetes agent and so on, or they want to keep it simple, like they do for any other analyzer they're currently using. So it's really, if you'll get feedback from customers about the feature, you'll know if you want to deprecate that or want to support that. I don't think there is a high cost of supporting that, but that's the product decision, right?
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. But we would definitely want to, that UX improvement you suggested, we would definitely want to do that where they can put the token in as part of their Kubernetes cluster setup instead of in the environment variables section.
Yeah. That's just the first step, just to get something working, and then definitely like improve UX on that. Because right now, when you'll read the documentation part, you'll see that that's mainly like very manual. Like you have to do something. Where it is here, get the token, then get the certificate, get the URL, then run this command, then you'll get the whole kubeconfig file, copy it, navigate to settings, configure it. It's not really user friendly. Like for now, it is easy. I mean, everyone that is familiar with GitLab can do it, but it's still not really user friendly. We want to be better. So, and there is like warning why it is important to configure it in a certain mode and so on. So I try to add all the information, and at the beginning I've added note that it's still in alpha stage and it's unstable, so we can change it anyway at some point. But yeah, this is like the first step we want to have.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thanks for clarifying that. So, okay, so the answer is, in the long term, instead of specifying environments to scan, we should be scanning clusters and namespaces in those clusters. And then the second change is that we should provide that cluster image scanning token as part of the UI when they set up their cluster.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we do that, will we be able to map we should then be able to map back those vulnerabilities to the Kubernetes cluster, correct? To add that
Yes.
security tab, that should be possible.
Yeah. So just to clarify, because there was a discussion about where to show those vulnerabilities, because that's the problem currently. Because okay, we have this
Right.
security, like we have the vulnerability report, and I recall the whole discussion about okay, having like I don't know, development vulnerabilities or operational and so on. So if they should be here or not. So that's the main problem for now. In the first iteration, what we're adding like additional scanner that is called like cluster image scanning that we just clarified 2 days ago. And it will be available here, and you'll see like, okay, the scanner was cluster image scanning, and you have those vulnerabilities like visible here. But the goal is to move that list from the security and compliance tab, like here, to infrastructure Kubernetes cluster, and to have like separate tab of security, and then list those vulnerabilities, right?
Yes, so we would have a security tab here for just the vulnerabilities in this cluster specifically, but then
Okay.
they would also show up in security and compliance in the vulnerability list under
Okay.
the operation tab there. So one project may actually be scanning multiple clusters. And so here you would get everything for the project. And then when you're viewing the cluster itself, you would see vulnerabilities specific to that cluster, similar to the
Okay.
way we do it in pipelines today. Like we have that
Yeah.
security tab, so you see the vulnerabilities just for that pipeline.
Okay. That's good
So
to
they would
hear.
actually show in both places. Yeah, again, just like pipelines.
All right. All right. I believe as soon as we'll have the designs, we'll just prepare the like the issues and so on. So we'll have like the proper plan, because I believe we need to extend the GraphQL API to support that and so on. But that's the goal for the future.
Okay, so I know we're almost up on time, but I did want to, if you don't mind, let me share my screen here, and
Sure.
I did
Let
want
me stop
to
my.
clarify just the syntax for all of this. So this would actually be clusters, and this would reference a cluster that you've set up, production cluster. And then in here, you would specify namespaces. So I'm actually not great with the YAML syntax, but something along the lines of, I'm probably going to mess this up exactly, but anyway, you would have a whole bunch of a listing of namespaces here, production, and I don't know what else, staging as well, just for example. But
Okay.
in here, I'm wondering if we need to have this be different, or if this can just be container scanning, and we would know if it's a live container scan or a project, I don't know what to call it, but a project versus, your cluster. We would be able to know the difference, because if it was a project scan, you would actually have, the projects variable here, and you would be listing out,
Yeah. A branch or something.
branches.
Yeah. For me, the main question is it's the difference between rule and action. Rule specifies when and on which conditions, and action do what. So I'm thinking if we should keep where we should keep actually information about the cluster and namespaces and so on. Maybe it should be in action. So, okay, whenever this is happening, so let's say every day at midnight, run container scanning or cluster image scanning. That's how we name it currently. Yeah, and here we should just add it, okay, on clusters ABC and environments ABC, and namespace ABC.
So the way we're doing it now, you've actually, like for Dask, for example, you pick the branches up here in the rules area.
Yeah.
And then it runs Dask. So the question of where to run the scan is up here. And actually, in both cases, we're really running a Trivy scan. So I think what we would do is you could just specify the cluster up top, schedule this cluster to be scanned. and we can pick container scanning. And, you know, for us on the back end, it's two very different things, this live container scan versus the code container scan. But from the customer's perspective, I don't think it's really that different. I think it's just running a Trivy scan, right, at the end of the day. And so, for example, if a customer set has these rules, then, you know, on the back end, this would actually translate to, you know, run a regular container scan against the main branch, and then run a cluster image scan against your production namespace, you know, in your production cluster. So it actually mapped to two different things in our backend, but I feel like from the customer's perspective that they would not need to differentiate that. You know, they're just specifying where. If we move that down, then I think it gets really confusing, because now you have the question of where are you scanning it up here for some things, and then down here for others, and then they have to start to separate those in the mind.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting UX issue to solve. You know, how to do it to be user friendly, because for me, when I look at the rules and I say if, like when I read the whole sentence, if schedule the environment production to be scanned, like it doesn't, like, okay, here, right? Yeah, exactly. I don't get the word if at the beginning, so maybe we should improve that. But that's definitely something that UX can solve, like the whole problem. For me, there's no difference if it will be in rules and action, because I'll read it anyway. In terms of YAML structure, I'll send you the how it can look like. But actually, what you did is great. We just need to make it YAML compatible, and then it will be okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure I probably messed up the YAML. I always
No worries.
the syntax of it, but yeah, that is a little bit funny up here. You know, it makes a lot of sense for almost everything else that we do to have if, you know, if a pipeline is run, you know, for our network policies, if network traffic is inbound, you know, some of the scan results policies that we're planning to do, you know, if secret detection scan finds this. So it works for everything except for schedule. It is a little bit of incorrect grammar there. It's not. So I'm not sure how to fix that, you know, if yeah, it gets a little bit tricky. I mean, we can always, because really there shouldn't be anything here, you know, for a proper English sentence, but you know, how do you, you know, maybe those change, you know, as these change. So like you change this to schedule and the word if disappears. Yeah, we'll have to play with that a little bit when we get closer to implementing this front end.
Cool.
Are you okay with keeping with doing that? Do you have any concerns with, you know, up here saying, you know, specifying the cluster up here in the namespaces?
No, I don't see any problems. We already can do it, like using environment variables. So it all ends up as translating, like, I mean, in the current state, in the first 2 iterations, it will be like translating what we have in the policy into environment variable sent to the job. And the third iteration will just read those policies from the database or from the repository. So I don't see any troubles here.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for clarifying all of that. I know Annabelle's working on all of these mocks, so we're excited to see this come out, and I know we've got a lot of users that are really excited to start scanning their production environment. So looking forward to it.
That's good. That's good. By the end of this week, we should have all the initial MRs merged, and I hope to have also documentation merged. So I'll prepare a small demo, record it, so you'll see how it works currently, and then we'll improve.
Sounds good. Thanks. Appreciate the chat.
Thank you. Bye.
Good one.